Hi everybody, welcome to Story Time from Johnson City Library. We've got a wonderful book today called Dazzle Ships, World War I and the Art of Confusion by Chris Barton and illustrated by Victo Ngai. This is a book about how one man's idea saved a lot of people during World War I. Now, can you recognize the one ship on this page that's painted in a sneaky, stripy camouflage? You probably can't see it, right? Oh, you can? Where is it? Oh, it's that big one right in front, isn't it? That ship was an Allied vessel. Now, Allied means that the people or the countries in World War I that were associated with Europe and the United States. And it was used during World War I, and it was camouflaged strangely for a reason. More than 1,200 U.S. ships were decked out that way, and so were more than twice as many ships in the British fleet. The idea was to make these ships harder for the German torpedoes to sink. That's right, harder. What were they thinking? Well, as the old saying goes, desperate times call for desperate measures. You see, World War I lasted from 1914 to 1918 and was one of the largest wars the world has ever seen. And here's kind of a little map of the different countries that were either the Allied powers or the Central powers. You see they're painted in different colors. German submarines known as U-boats, which meant the U stood for undersea, were sinking other ships carrying all kinds of things, including food. Now, the UK or Britain depended on goods arriving by sea because they're an island, and if they couldn't get the food, people might starve. Submarines and the torpedoes they fired were big changes in the way wars were fought. Never before could an enemy hide beneath the waves and attack from more than a mile away. The U-boat crew would use its periscope to quickly peek above the surface of the water, pick a target, and launch a torpedo toward the spot where its target was going to be in a minute or so. Torpedoes were slower back then, but very deadly. Britain tried different things to stop the submarine attacks. There was talk of training seagulls and sea lions to spot the subs and to have swimmers smash U-boats' periscopes with hammers. The British started having their supply ships stick close together and sail in convoys guarded by armed vessels. The Royal Navy began using depth charges, 300-pound underwater weapons that would explode when they were sank to certain levels to damage or destroy the U-boats. And a Royal Navy volunteer reserve lieutenant commander named Norman Wilkinson had another suggestion. It was unlikely. In fact, it sounded a little bonkers. His ideas was to camouflage the ships. I suddenly got the idea that since it was impossible to paint a ship so that she could not be seen by a submarine, the extreme opposite was the answer. To paint her, not for low visibility, but in such a way as to break up her form and thus confuse a submarine officer as to the course on which she was headed. The word camouflage itself was a brand new idea at the time. But the idea of camouflage, of fooling an enemy into seeing something other than what's actually there, was an old one. Can you see what's in this picture camouflaged? How about this one? Camouflage is very well known in nature. Wilkinson, however, got his idea at just the right time. The British government was desperate for a way to stop the U-boat attacks. It listened to Wilkinson's plan, named his approach Dazzle, and said, more or less, give it a try. So he did, and in spring of 1917, he had a ship Dazzle painted with a crazy-looking pattern on it, and look at it. How about that? And what the patterns were supposed to confuse the German submarine crews was to confuse them about the direction the ship was going and its speed. Remember, they put the torpedo a mile ahead of where the ship was going. So the U-boats didn't carry many torpedoes. If Dazzle could cause a German sub to waste a torpedo by firing it to a spot where the British ship wasn't actually going to be, and if this happened over and over, then more British ships would stay afloat and get their cargo to the destination. And that meant the people on the British Isle, the Isle of Great Britain, could get their food. Now, the British Navy really liked Wilkinson's first ship, and it asked for 50 more. And when those 50 were painted, they asked for another 50. Well, Wilkinson couldn't paint all those ships by himself, so he asked 24 young women who had been to art school, and they helped him design the paintings for the ships. And he had the King of England, King George V, who had been a sailor since he was 12 years old, to help him decide which of the designs would actually confuse the Germans. So he gave the king a periscope and put the painted ships on a little pedestal and had them spin very slowly and asked the king to figure out which direction they were going. And guess what? The king was wrong. Oh my goodness. He had been dazzled. Well, there were so many ships to paint in Great Britain and in the United States that members of the Women's Reserve Camouflage Corps did the painting and overnight surprised those who had walked past their gray-colored building just the evening, or gray-colored ship just the evening before. So women were working in World War I to help the war effort. Britain, the United States, and their allies turned things around, and Germany surrendered in November of 1918. By the time the fighting stopped, 1,256 American ships had been painted in Dazzle designs, along with close to 3,000 British ships. So just how well did Dazzle work? Nobody really knows. The U-boat attack stopped succeeding, but historians mostly gave the credit to convoys and depth charges. Sorry, sea lions. While the United States said right after the war that Dazzle ships kept lots of ships from getting sunk, Britain wasn't so sure. The Royal Navy couldn't prove that Dazzle had actually spared any ships, but some insisted at the very least The sailors of these ships felt better knowing that something had been tried to keep them from getting torpedoed. And even now, everything we do, creativity is good for more than morale. Excuse me. After all those of us inspired by Norman Wilkinson's paint job know, sometimes desperate things call for dazzling measures. The end. See you next time.